I had barely finished unloading my moving truck when flashing lights appeared in my driveway. There she stood, Linda, the self-proclaimed queen of Oakwood Estates, pointing her manicured finger directly at me. "Officer, arrest this trespasser immediately," she shrieked, clipboard clutched to her chest like armor. "He's violating at least 7 HOA regulations." The responding officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. What Linda didn't know, as she continued her tirade about property values and community standards, was one crucial detail. I was their new boss, the town's newly appointed police chief. The look on her face when they saluted me, absolutely priceless. And what happened next left the entire neighborhood speechless. After 15 years in special forces and another decade in metropolitan law enforcement, I thought I'd seen it all. Combat zones in 3 countries, gang territories, hostage situations, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for Linda Harrington and the battlefield known as Oakwood Estates. My name is Michael Reeves, newly appointed police chief of Millfield, population 8,742. The town council had practically begged me to take the position after their previous chief retired amid some irregularities with the department. I was promised a peaceful transition, a charming community, and most importantly, a break from the high-stress environments that had dominated my career. The modest colonial home I purchased in Oakwood Estates was supposed to be my sanctuary, a place to finally exhale. I should have known better when the real estate agent nervously mentioned the active HOA. Linda Harrington, 57, stands exactly 5 in her sensible beige pumps, but carries herself like she's 7 feet tall. Her silver blonde bob is cut with military precision, matching her ever-present clipboard and the calculating look in her steel blue eyes. As self-appointed president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association for the past 11 years, Linda rules this suburban kingdom with an iron fist disguised in a cashmere glove. My first encounter with Linda came precisely 47 minutes after the moving truck arrived. I was directing movers where to place my couch when a sharp knock interrupted us. There she stood on my porch, clipboard clutched to her chest, flanked by 2 uncomfortable-looking neighbors she'd clearly dragged along as witnesses. "You're in violation of Oakwood Estates HOA Regulation 17B, she announced without introduction, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "All new residents must submit moving plans for approval 2 weeks prior to any moving activity." I wiped my brow with my sleeve and extended my hand. "Michael Reeves. Just closed on the house yesterday. Nice to meet you." She ignored my hand. "This moving truck is blocking the aesthetic sightline of the neighborhood. And that couch," she pointed accusingly at my comfortable, if slightly worn leather sofa, "violates our furniture quality standards." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "Excuse me?" "Additionally," she continued, flipping through her clipboard, "your mailbox is the wrong shade of black. Your front door needs repainting to an approved color. And those hydrangeas are absolutely forbidden. You'll need to remove them immediately." The 2 neighbors behind her, a middle-aged man and woman, looked at their shoes, clearly embarrassed but unwilling to contradict Linda. "Look, Miss Harrington." "HOA President Harrington," she corrected. "Miss Harrington, I appreciate the welcome, but I'm the legal owner of this property. I wasn't informed of any moving restrictions when I purchased it." Her smile tightened. "Ignorance of HOA regulations doesn't exempt you from following them. Here's your first warning notice. 3 warnings result in financial penalties." She thrust a pink paper into my hands and turned to leave, adding over her shoulder, "And do something about that truck. It's lowering property values by the minute." I stood dumbfounded on my own porch, pink slip in hand, watching her march back to her immaculately landscaped home across the street. The two neighbors gave me apologetic glances before scurrying away. I returned to directing the movers, deciding to deal with HOA President Harrington later. But apparently, Linda wasn't finished with me. Not 20 minutes later, I noticed her photographing my house, my truck, even my moving boxes from the sidewalk. When I approached to ask what she was doing, she hurried away, phone pressed to her ear. 15 minutes after that, two patrol cars pulled into my driveway, lights flashing. Linda stood triumphantly at the curb, arms crossed, as Officers Jenkins and Rodriguez, soon to be my subordinates, though they didn't know it, yet approached my door with confused expressions. The neighborhood conflict I'd hoped to avoid had officially begun. The two patrol cars idled in my driveway, their lights painting my new home in alternating flashes of red and blue. Officers Jenkins and Rodriguez approached with the cautious demeanor they'd been trained to adopt in uncertain situations. Behind them, Linda Harrington stood with her arms crossed, a smile of vindication playing at the corners of her mouth. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," Linda called out, hurrying forward with her clipboard extended like a shield. "This man is in direct violation of at least 7 HOA regulations and refused to comply when instructed. I want him removed from the premises immediately." Officer Jenkins, a stocky veteran with salt and pepper hair, looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, we received a call about trespassing." "Yes, exactly." Linda nodded vigorously. "He's trespassing on Oakwood Estates property without proper HOA clearance. I've already issued him a formal warning." She thrust the pink slip toward the officers, as if it were an arrest warrant. Rodriguez, younger and clearly trying to maintain his professional composure, cleared his throat. "Sir, could we see some identification, please?" I nodded, reaching for my wallet. "Of course, Officer Rodriguez." His eyebrows shot up at my use of his name. I handed over my ID along with another card, my official appointment as Millfield's new police chief, effective today. The change in their demeanor was immediate. Rodriguez straightened his posture while Jenkins's eyes widened in recognition. "Chief Reeves," Jenkins said, suddenly formal. "We weren't expecting to meet you until tomorrow's department briefing." "Surprise," I said with a slight smile. "I was hoping to get settled before my first day, but it seems Oakwood Estates had other plans." Linda pushed forward, her confidence momentarily faltering before she regained her composure. "I don't care if he's the President of the United States. HOA regulations apply to everyone." Jenkins turned to her with newfound confidence. "Miss Harrington, purchasing property doesn't constitute trespassing, and HOA violations, even if legitimate, are civil matters, not criminal ones." "But he's breaking the rules." Linda's voice rose an octave. "You're police officers. Enforce the law." "HOA regulations aren't laws, ma'am," Rodriguez explained patiently. "They're private contractual agreements. If there's a dispute, it needs to be handled through proper HOA channels or civil court." Linda's face flushed crimson. "Fine. If you won't do your jobs, I'll handle this myself." She spun on her heel and marched away, phone already pressed to her ear. The officers apologized profusely as they left. Jenkins lingered a moment longer. "Word of advice, Chief? Linda Harrington has made life miserable for half the neighborhood. Watch your back." I thanked him, not realizing how prophetic his warning would prove. The next morning, I found my mailbox plastered with pink violation notices. According to Linda's meticulous documentation, I was guilty of grass exceeding maximum allowable height by 25 inches, unauthorized vehicle police cruiser, parked in driveway, improper trash bin placement. Though collection day was still 2 days away, unapproved window treatments, visible from street display of unauthorized flag. I owned no flag or flagpole. Each violation came with a $150 suggested fine and 48-hour compliance deadline. That afternoon, I returned home to find Linda photographing my house from multiple angles. When she spotted me, she didn't even pretend to be embarrassed. Documenting ongoing violations, she announced, "The HOA board meets next week to discuss enforcement actions." "There is no flag on my property, Linda," I pointed out calmly. She sniffed dismissively. "The violation notice clearly states potential for unauthorized flag display based on the installation of mounting brackets by the previous owner." Before I could respond, my neighbor from across the street, Tom Fitzgerald, a retired high school principal, approached hesitantly. "Chief Reeves? Got a minute?" he asked, glancing nervously at Linda, who pretended to be engrossed in her clipboard notes, while obviously eavesdropping. We walked to the edge of my property, where Tom spoke in a low voice. "Just wanted to warn you, Linda's on the warpath. She's calling an emergency HOA meeting about you." "Thanks for the heads up," I replied. "Have you had problems with her too?" Tom's laugh was bitter. "Everyone has. Last year, she fined me $300 because my Christmas lights were excessively festive. The year before, it was because my mailbox was an unapproved shade of black. Most people just pay to avoid the hassle." Over the next few days, more neighbors cautiously introduced themselves, each with their own Linda horror stories. Sarah Chen had been fined for planting non-indigenous flowers. The Patels received violations for culturally inappropriate lawn ornaments. A pair of small stone elephants with deep family significance. Elderly Mrs. Abernathy had been reduced to tears when Linda demanded she remove the ramp her son had installed for her wheelchair. "Why does everyone put up with this?" I asked Frank Delgado, a contractor who lived 2 doors down. "These fines aren't even legally enforceable without proper HOA procedures." Frank shrugged. "Linda threatened to put liens on properties for unpaid fines. Most folks don't know enough about HOA law to fight back, and lawyers are expensive." The situation escalated when I returned home Friday evening to find a tow truck attempting to remove my personal vehicle from my own driveway. Linda stood supervising, clipboard in hand. "This vehicle violates Section 12, Paragraph C of our covenant," she declared as I approached. "No vehicles over 6 years old may be parked in visible areas." The tow truck driver looked relieved when I showed my badge. "Sorry, Chief. The lady said it was authorized by the HOA." As the truck departed without my car, Linda's expression hardened. "This isn't over, Mr. Reeves. No one defies the Oakwood Estates HOA. That night, I received emails from 17 different neighbors, all expressing support but afraid to speak publicly against Linda. It became clear that her reign of suburban terror extended far beyond petty rules. She had systematically created a climate of fear throughout the entire community. The battle lines were drawn. Linda Harrington had no idea who she was dealing with, but she was about to find out. The manila folder landed on my kitchen table with a satisfying thud. Across from me, Eleanor Vasquez, a petite woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper legal mind, tapped a manicured finger on the HOA documents I'd provided. "Chief Reeves, what Linda Harrington has been doing isn't just unethical, it's potentially illegal," she stated, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly how powerful her words were. "I've specialized in HOA law for 15 years, and this is one of the most egregious cases of overreach I've encountered." I leaned forward, feeling the first spark of hope since moving to Oakwood Estates. "Can you be more specific?" Eleanor nodded, flipping through the pages with practiced efficiency. First, these emergency regulations she's been enforcing were never properly ratified by the board. Second, the fine structure violates state statutes on reasonable penalties. Third, she paused, pulling out Linda's pink violation notices. Issuing financial penalties without a proper hearing process is explicitly forbidden by your HOA's own bylaws. So these fines aren't legally enforceable? I asked. Not remotely, Eleanor confirmed, her expression hardening. And if she's been collecting money based on these invalid citations, that opens up serious questions about financial impropriety. The next morning, I arranged for County Building Inspector Harold Chen to visit my property. Harold was a meticulous professional who'd been with the department for 27 years. He arrived precisely at 9 a.m., clipboard in hand, and spent 2 hours examining every inch of my property. Linda emerged from her house the moment she spotted his official vehicle, hovering nearby with poorly disguised anxiety as he conducted his inspection. When Harold finally finished, she approached with her characteristic false confidence. "Excuse me, Inspector. I'm Linda Harrington, HOA President. I've documented numerous code violations on this property that require immediate attention." Harold adjusted his glasses, regarding her with the neutral expression of a career civil servant. "Ma'am, I've completed a thorough inspection of this property. There are 0 code violations present." Linda's smile faltered, but the grass height falls well within county ordinance parameters, Harold interrupted, making a note on his clipboard. "The mailbox placement complies with postal regulations. The unauthorized structural modifications." Harold looked up from his clipboard. "What unauthorized modifications?" Linda gestured vaguely toward my house. Well, there must be something." "Miss Harrington," Harold said with practiced patience, "making false reports of code violations is itself a violation of County Ordinance 47.3, subject to administrative penalties." He turned to me. "Chief Reeves, you'll receive my official report by email this afternoon. Have a good day." As Harold drove away, Linda stood frozen on my lawn, her face a mask of disbelief. For perhaps the first time in her HOA presidency, someone with actual authority had publicly contradicted her. "This isn't over," she hissed before storming back to her house. She was right about that, but not in the way she imagined. 3 days later, the quarterly HOA meeting was scheduled at the Oakwood Estates Community Center. Though I hadn't received an official invitation, Tom Fitzgerald discreetly texted me the details, adding, "Linda's planning something big against you. Might want to be there." I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in business casual attire rather than my uniform. The small meeting room was already half filled with residents who glanced nervously in my direction as I took a seat in the back row. Linda, stationed at the front table with 3 uncomfortable-looking board members, visibly stiffened when she noticed me. "This is a private meeting for HOA members only," she announced loudly. I held up the deed to my house. "Homeowner. That makes me a member." Before she could respond, more residents filed in, filling every available seat. I recognized many faces, neighbors, who had shared their Linda horror stories with me over the past week. At precisely 7:00 p.m., Linda called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. First agenda item, new enforcement measures for covenant violations. She proceeded to outline a draconian set of new rules, including mandatory pre-approval for any visitors staying longer than 4 hours, restrictions on what could be visible through windows, and tripling the fine structure for violations. When she finally paused for breath, I raised my hand. Linda pointedly ignored me, but Walter Green, the elderly treasurer, nodded in my direction. "The gentleman in the back has a question," he said, earning a withering glare from Linda. I stood, addressing not Linda but the entire room. "Thank you. I've been reviewing the HOA financial statements provided in tonight's packet. Could someone explain the line item on page 4 listing $120,000 for administrative expenses?" A heavy silence fell over the room. Linda's face flushed crimson. That's standard operational costs," she stammered. "For a 57-home community?" I pressed. "That's over $2,100 per household annually just for administration. The HOA fee is only $1,800 per year total." Walter Green adjusted his glasses, suddenly interested in the financial documents before him. "That doesn't seem right. Furthermore," I continued, "I've consulted with an HOA attorney who confirms that many of the fines being issued are legally unenforceable under both state law and this HOA's own bylaws." The room erupted into murmurs. Several residents began flipping frantically through their packets. "This is outrageous!" Linda banged her gavel repeatedly. "You have no authority to question HOA operations." Sarah Chen stood up from her seat. "Actually, as members who pay dues, we absolutely do have that right. The bylaws clearly state that financial records must be transparent," added Frank Delgado, waving his copy of the HOA Constitution. More voices joined in, years of suppressed frustration finally finding an outlet. Linda's attempts to restore order grew increasingly desperate as residents began sharing stories of arbitrary fines and harassment. Walter Green, looking increasingly troubled, raised his hand for silence. When the room finally quieted, his voice was steady but concerned. "As treasurer, I sign off on financial statements, but I've never seen itemized expenses for this administrative fund. Linda always said it covered legal consultations and record keeping." $120,000 worth? Someone called out incredulously. "I move for an immediate audit," Sarah Chen declared, standing again. "And I move to suspend all fine collections until we verify they comply with our bylaws." "I second that motion," Frank added quickly. Linda's face had gone from red to ashen. "You can't do this. I've run this HOA for 11 years. "Perhaps that's the problem," Mrs. Abernathy said quietly from her wheelchair in the front row. "I call for a vote of no confidence in the current president." The motion spread through the room like wildfire. Within minutes, hands were raised in an overwhelming vote to remove Linda from her position and launch a comprehensive audit of the HOA's finances. As the meeting dissolved into chaotic planning for interim leadership, Linda gathered her belongings with shaking hands. When she passed my seat on her way out, she paused briefly. "You've made a powerful enemy today," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. I smiled politely. "Actually, Linda, I think I've just helped this community find its voice again." The door slammed behind her with finality, and for the first time since moving to Oakwood Estates, I felt like I might actually be home. The forensic accountant's report landed with the weight of a tombstone on the conference table. Walter Green, now serving as interim HOA president, removed his reading glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose, his weathered face etched with disbelief. "My God," he whispered, shaking his head slowly. 11 years. She's been siphoning funds for 11 years. I leaned forward, scanning the highlighted figures that told a damning story. "How much total?" $246,732, Sarah Chen replied, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Almost $250,000, diverted through fake administrative expenses, phantom maintenance contracts, and inflated vendor invoices." The emergency HOA meeting that evening was standing room only. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other for years now stood shoulder to shoulder, united by shared outrage When Walter presented the findings, the room fell into a stunned silence. Every single one of those illegal fines she collected. They went straight into her personal accounts, he explained, his voice carrying to every corner of the packed room. The money was never recorded in official HOA ledgers. Frank Delgado, newly appointed to the board, stood up. We've already contacted the district attorney's office. They're pursuing criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Mrs. Abernathy raised her hand, her voice quavering slightly. What happens now? To Linda? To our money? The court has frozen her assets, I explained, including her house. Restitution will be the priority once the legal proceedings conclude. 3 weeks later, we watched in collective silence as Linda Harrington, former HOA tyrant, loaded the last of her belongings into a moving truck. The bank had foreclosed on her mortgage after discovering she had been using fraudulently obtained HOA funds to make payments. She avoided looking at any of us, her shoulders hunched defensively as she climbed into her car and drove away without a backward glance. The transformation of Oakwood Estates was remarkable in its swiftness. The new HOA board, led by Walter and comprised of volunteers from diverse backgrounds, immediately nullified all of Linda's arbitrary regulations. Refund checks were issued for improperly collected fines. The annual HOA fee was reduced by 40% now that the budget wasn't being plundered. Most striking was the change in the neighborhood itself. Gardens bloomed with previously unauthorized flowers. Children's laughter echoed from backyard playsets that would have earned Linda's pink citations. The Patels proudly displayed their stone elephants. Mrs. Abernathy's wheelchair ramp was professionally rebuilt and improved by volunteers. 6 months later, we gathered for a community barbecue in the park that had once been off limits after 6 p.m. under Linda's regime. As twilight settled over laughing neighbors and playing children, Tom Fitzgerald sidled up beside me with a cold drink. "Heard something you might find interesting," he said with a wry smile. Linda moved to Meadowbrook Heights across town. Apparently tried to get herself elected to their HOA board right away. I raised an eyebrow. "How'd that go for her?" Tom chuckled. "Not well. Someone recognized her from that viral video of our meeting, the one where she stormed out, shouting threats." "Ah, the wonders of social media," I replied, watching a group of children chase fireflies across the lawn. "You know," Tom said thoughtfully, "I've lived here 15 years, and this is the first time it's actually felt like a community." As the summer evening deepened around us, I realized he was right. What had once been a collection of houses ruled by fear had transformed into something precious, a neighborhood where people actually knew each other's names, shared their lives, and looked out for one another. Linda Harrington had lost everything, but Oakwood Estates had found its soul. Have you ever encountered a power-hungry HOA president like Linda? Or perhaps you've lived under absurd community regulations that made your home feel less like your castle and more like a prison. Your experiences matter. Share your HOA horror stories in the comments below. We're building a community of homeowners standing up for their rights. Did this tale of suburban justice satisfy your sense of fairness? Hit that like button to let us know. Subscribe to our channel and activate notifications to catch every new story of everyday heroes confronting injustice. From neighborhood tyrants to workplace bullies, we showcase the moments when ordinary people find extraordinary courage. Remember, sometimes the most important revolutions happen right in our own backyards.